Good evening, everyone. Good evening. We're excited about having you all with us tonight for part 4 of a 5-part series of saying about who we are. A conversation tonight where all of us have our parts to do tonight. I am Perry Holman. I am your MC. Before I go further, let's give Jared Gray a hand for the music he provided to us. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jared. Now we have about 45 minutes to an hour of panelist discussion, and after you will have the opportunity to ask questions. So as the panelists are talking, if there's a question that comes to mind, please write it down or put it back in memory so you can ask it during that time. We are going to have a great time tonight. The part 4 series is called We Are Journeying. So we got quite a topics to cover, and we got a great panelist here tonight to cover each one of those topics. So before I go further, though, we want to play a video where Aaron's going to talk a little bit more about the Breaking Bread Village and what we're all about and some of the rules. Now I want to introduce our panelists for tonight. First coming in, we have Jared. We have John.
And the healing cancer.
Mike. Dan. Kathy. And Matt. Give them a round of applause. And now, for our hosts, in bringing this panel together, and we all want and driving the conversation tonight, is Miss Erin Patrice. Give her a hand tonight, Erin Patrice. Thank you, Erin.
Whoa. Hello, everybody. How you all doing?
Good, thank you. Very good.
Look so serious. We're gonna have a good time tonight. Oh, hello, everybody. How are you all out there? Awesome. Awesome. All right. We are going to go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to thank you all for being here today, our guests invited to the table. We had a couple of our guests that were not able to come tonight due to various things. And I will share, because she said it was okay. She was really passionate about coming tonight. Her brother was shot a couple weeks ago. And she wanted to still come because she's very passionate about gun reform. Right, and so she wanted to talk about that, and but she was not able to make it. So I just want to just kind of send out well wishes and love to her and her family as they go through that healing process. Another thing I want to share is that we do have Anne Marie here, who is a therapist, right here, and we've last couple of times we've had someone here just in case, because some of these topics are, it could be triggering for some people, right? So if you need to step out and talk to someone, she is available. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, you guys ready?
Yeah. Yes.
All right. So I want to just open it up with let's get right into it. Let's just go right into abortion, right? And female reproductive rights, right? I mean, you know why? We don't need to tippy-toe around this. This is what we're here for. So I want to ask you all, first, let's just kind of talk about what are your thoughts about surrounding abortion, right? What are your thoughts regarding abortion? Does anybody want to go first? Don't be afraid, because this is a no judgment zone, so we are going to talk and share, and I welcome the conversation. So what are your thoughts around abortion? Yay, nay, some questions? Go ahead, John, go. I see your I see your brain moving around. Go for it.
Moving. Well, I start off with I'm pro-life. That's going to be my starting point.
Sure.
I do believe we need to. I know by the way, I can't see anybody out there, so I'm looking generally. But I do think it's important that we have the conversation, and it's a hard one. It doesn't get much more polarizing. You're right. You jumped into the lion's den real quick.
Yeah, we jumped right in. we only have
next time, I'm not going to make eye contact with you. I'll tell you that. But I think it is. The state of Michigan. I was glad that Roe v. Wade went down because I think most things need to be a state decision. Michigan's a very different state than Iowa, than California, and the citizens need to figure out what's right for them. And then it gets really personal after that. So I think that's where I'm going to start with.
Okay.
And then I'll let the other 5 go.
Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts about abortion? What are your personal stances? Go for it, Kathy.
So I probably ought to speak up at this point in time. It was interesting what you just said in terms of it can get very personal. And I think that's the part that trying to even put it at the state level, it still won't really be able to address all of those personal issues. And my feeling, I come from an era when it wasn't legal to an era now that it is legal, or has been. And so I remember what it was like when it was not legal. I have worked with young people that have had to make very difficult choices in terms of whether they could raise a child, whether they were capable of raising that child, whether that child was going to be healthy. I've had a relative that had a child that did die in the womb. So my feeling about it is why it can't be so tightly regulated by the government is because there just isn't one size that will ever fit all the circumstances. And it seems like we ought to be looking to the people that are trained to deal with pregnancy, the OBGYNs, that we should be able to trust them working with that patient that they're going to make the right decision. I feel like we've kind of gone off on the end of fear and thinking that it's being misused, that it's being overly expanded, and we shouldn't be operating in that area of fear. We should really be operating in the area of what will maintain a woman's health, what will maintain a child's health. And so you really have to, I think, allow it to be an individual decision that's made between the patient and the doctor.
Yeah. So this topic we could talk about all night, first of all, because I have so many things going through my head, but does anybody else want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I just,
Please.
I work in economic policy, so it's outside my field. Obviously I have personal thoughts on it.
Sure.
But it's an incredibly tough issue because unlike many issues where you're talking about, all right, do I favor higher taxes or lower taxes, or how do I want to provide the government services, or how should we run our schools, or all these other issues, most of the time, people often are starting from a different definitional standpoint. And the question is, when is something life, and in terms of having human rights, and when do we allow somebody to make the decision about when to end that? Because nobody thinks it's okay to kill children, and most people have conflicting and contradictory thoughts on it, even within a child or a fetus within the mother. If a mother wants it, it's the greatest time of happiness that we all celebrate all the time, and if it comes from a struggle, or a time where it's unwanted, or it's very early in the pregnancy, most people have some type of line of when it's okay to have an abortion. But it just becomes very tough and complicated, and probably the number one issue I think people speak past each other, because on the one hand, you have people that are simply saying, look, it's not the government's business, it's an incredibly tough decision, and it should be between a mother and a doctor. And you have people on the other side saying that they're understanding of that, but at some point you're going to draw the line of when human rights begin, and people just disagree on when that is. And so it becomes, they can't figure that out.
Yeah. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
Yeah, if I could add to that a little bit,
Sure.
just the importance of having a conversation when things live in a lot of gray space. I think it's so important. On a personal level, I believe for a long time that the law should be broad enough to include the most extreme circumstances, which generally are extraordinarily tragic. Things that are unfathomable for me to really understand, because they are just so harrowing and so difficult. And I think it's important for the law to encompass that, knowing that these situations, in their most extreme, can be quite rare. But even still, it's important for us to have protection of that. At the same time, knowing that the conversation is so important, I've actually been one to understand how the original Roe v. Wade decision actually made things a lot more difficult. We were on a path, in the feminist movement especially, to really have this conversation as a nation. And that 1973 decision almost short-circuited that process and created really a huge polarization in our country, making it more difficult to talk about and making these kind of purity tests on left and right that really contributed to, I think, a lot of strife. Not to mention that over time, Roe kind of became weaker and weaker. Everybody kind of thought it'd be overturned in 1992 in the Planned Parenthood versus Casey case, and it was just really barely preserved. But we've seen even while Roe was on the books, states like Florida and Texas were enacting 15-week limitations, 6-week, the heartbeat bill. So I think this alternate reality where Roe v. Wade is still around, wasn't exactly great for people who really want to support strong, secure reproductive rights. So I actually find some common ground with those who are critics of the Roe decision. I just approach that from a different perspective as one who respects the importance of choice.
Yeah. John, you are thinking of something. Go ahead and say it.
I gotta stop looking at you.
No. I can read minds.
Made eye contact. That was your first mistake.
Yeah, I know.
You did it again, yeah.
No, I do think we as a nation do need to come to at least some kind of conclusion as to where life begins. For the people who are pro-life and the people who are pro-choice, you could put them in the room with all the data and they're never going to agree. So I think if we can start with what I would say too far out there, third terms and things that abortions to me I'd like to see us dial that back and at some point come to a space, and then we can deal with the unique situations that have to take in a more close-knit decision. But I do think we need to come to a conclusion as to where that space is. Where's life? Some people say when the sperm hits the egg, you're there. Some people will say it's when there's a heartbeat, when there's a pulse, when it can live on its own. I think that's maybe a more viable discussion to maybe start with and agree as close as we'll never get 100% agreement, but.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody over here want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I, for one, am very thankful that we have a panel of mostly men, because I think we know exactly what to do about this topic. We'll help you out, Kathy, okay? But I think I've wondered about the reality is, I think I heard this statistically speaking, or a survey, Barna, somewhere, I don't know, but that most people don't perceive or understand abortion as a desirable outcome. Like, I don't want this, but this is like, I have to make this choice, or I'm coming by it unwillingly, or there's something that's happening that this is my only option. And so I think that's probably a really good common ground to begin with, is that as a nation, as a people, we don't say like, let's abort all children. Like, that's what we want. Like, no one really wants that. But it gets tangled up in the choice and life and this or that. What I really like to know about would be what would be the culture we could create that would be able to incentivize life and to make it possible that abortion isn't the only option, right? I don't want to have an abortion. What are my options out there? Like, can we, beef up adoption? Can we really, there's been talk about child tax credits, and can we expand that in some way that we meaningfully say, like, yeah, I want to have children, and I know a lot of the reasons that people want to have an abortion is because they can't afford another child. So what are the things that we can do as a society to really shore up families and bring life into families as a whole and to women as a whole, so
Yeah.
that we don't have to make a choice of this or that. It's how do we celebrate all the parties involved here?
Yeah. I have so many thoughts on this because, so I will thank you all for your input. So how do I want to say this? I've seen in my life, right, where people have used abortion as a remedy to having fun that night, right? And they happen to get pregnant and they don't want to have the baby, right? And so it was not necessarily a medical reason. It was not, and I want to throw both sides out here, right? Because I mean, this argument happens, right? Where people, we do kind of romanticize the idea that everybody that chooses abortion is because it's like fatal, right? The child may die or the mother may die. But some people use it as like a plan B, for lack of a better term, right? And so I think that when people have these questions of how do we do this in a way that is humane, right? And also honoring the woman and the child, right? And what they're going through. Are we using it as a just remedy to, good fun night at the bar? And this happens. So I mean, and so like when I talk to people about this, or like even like research, right? I mean, you read these articles and people have both sides of it, where it's like, okay, it could be fatal. I mean, and at that point it's like, or you have a child that was violated by a parent or someone close to them, right? And I would never want to tell a child to have a baby at 10 years old or whatever it is because someone took something from them. And then there is that other side where people use it as just kind of what to do, and people can make that decision. And I think for me personally, that's where sometimes I have question of to other people, like in this regard, like the moral part of it, like where do we draw that line with something that is kind of moral, right, and that's immoral, and that's, of course, that's per person, right? Everybody has their own personal ideas behind what's moral and what's immoral, but I wanted to kind of pose that part of it too, where that is some people's frustration, right, with abortion, is that it's not always this tragic possibility. It's just, I don't want to have a baby. And then some people, it's like, well, thank goodness you don't want to have a baby, because you'd probably be terrible as a parent, and so thank you. So, and I guess that's my other part of this is, we talk about adoption. We talk about, because that's always my question. Okay, yes, we are pro-life, cool. What about the after, right? Because I work with children that have horrible lives, right? Horrible lives. It's like heartbreaking. And it's like, okay, this person could have possibly aborted the child. And I'm trying to throw this out here, right? So stay with me on this. They could have aborted the child, and that John, don't look over here because I'll call on you, but they have the child for whatever reason, and then this child has a terrible life. So my question is always to people who are pro-life, what about after, right? We want them to have the babies. So what are we setting up? And that kind of goes back to what you were saying. What are we setting up to ensure that they have a good quality of life? Because if we want to force people to have babies, then we need to be there too, right, when they have them. So does anybody want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'd say to that is we're in a community where we have a strong pregnancy resource center. If you are someone struggling with that, they are there every step of the way. They do counseling when you're pregnant. They are there with you afterwards. They do care packages. They do subsidies to help you with a variety of different things. And then, if keeping the child's not an option, there are adoption services. And I hesitate to get in there because I think some people on the pro-life side use it as like, well, this is pretty easy. Just put it up for adoption.
And it's not that easy.
And it's not easy, and it's incredible. But I do think a lot of people also don't realize that there is mass waiting lists for people trying to adopt kids across this country. And so that is an option. And, there's government policy and public policy of to help moms and help young kids. But we do an awful lot of that, and both from the nonprofit side and the government side. And specifically here in Midland, which just I know more about, I can't think of any service that you can't get. If you are a mom with a young child, there are lots of groups that are willing to help you, and Pregnancy Resource Center is a place that's their whole existence.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody else? And then we're going to move on to, go ahead, Kathy.
I believe that if we compared ourselves to other peer countries, that we're not doing the job we need to do for mothers and children. And kind of what Matt was addressing there, that we may support them through the birth process, but if you look right now today in terms of what simply daycare costs are, when you look at across the nation in terms of early childhood that's available to all children, there's many ways, even in terms of the leave time that a mother has after. Yes, we've added it, but if you look at our peer countries, we are behind. And so we really, on one hand, we're saying that we don't want to allow abortion, that we want to celebrate the life of this child. But then on the other hand, once the child is born, we still aren't up to par where we should be to support the life of that child and the life of that mother. And so I think until we're willing also as a nation to make those types of changes, it's hard to simply look at the abortion issue and say that's just off there by itself. Because it really is, this is a life that's being brought into the world that mother will be caring for throughout its life, or until, the age of 18 at least.
Well, it goes past that. I've discovered that. It goes past
it doesn't end.
There is no end to it. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I mean, and that's the thing, like, when I'm in these different, like, silos of groups, right? And it's like, people are saying, we want you to have the baby, but then, if someone complains later and says, I need help, I can't survive it, people say, well, just do it, get another job, or, it's like, well, we can't have it both ways. You can't want them to have the baby and then not provide support. So, but I also understand the other side of it, where people feel like we don't want to also use it as just a, remedy to a fun night. Right? We have to be responsible in our decisions. Anytime, I believe, when we bring life into the world. So we're going to move on to the next topic because I want to get to some other ones. Because, like I said, we could talk about some of these all night. So gun control, right? So we know that gun reform, gun control has been a huge topic for the last, forever. But for the last couple of years, we really have been seeing, a different. With the, school shootings and just all the different legislation, like laws that people are trying to uphold, because there are rules already out there and laws already out there, but I don't know if we're always enforcing them or how we do that. So what do you all think? What is your personal stance on gun control? Because I don't want to be the one talking. What do you all think your personal stance on gun control? Mike, you're looking at me. I see it. Let's go. And then Dan, you have to say.
So I think so much of our discussion is founded in things that were intentionally planted to divide us back in the 1980s. Our interpretation of the Second Amendment has become very fraught. And some of that is from specific scholarship that actually was funded by the NRA that ended up becoming the basis for a lot of Supreme Court decisions. There's a book that I really recommend called These Truths by Jill Lepore, and she looks back at how the NRA really used to be an organization that focused on safety and recreation, and somewhere in the time frame of the 70s and 80s, it morphed into an organization that was very hard-lined about being opposed to any kind of restrictions whatsoever. My dad, he actually used to be an NRA member, proudly, proud Reaganite, and he ended his association with the NRA several years back because it's not the one he grew up with. And I think, unfortunately, we've entered this polarized time where, in the words of Jill Lepore, it's like either abortion is freedom and guns are murder, or guns are freedom and abortion is murder. And how did we get there? And so I think going back to history and understanding where these things come from, we can realize how much we're almost kind of caught in the trap that was set for us politically by a lot of those leaders back then.
Well, we don't want to go down that rabbit hole because we could talk about that a little bit more, but thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yep, Dan, go ahead.
So, gun control, I'm a gun owner. I have several guns. My guns are locked up. My children know that I have guns in the house. They know not to touch them. I've obtained all of my guns legally. I've taken the classes to be certified in those. So I don't know if it's more of a gun problem or a mental illness problem that people have. So, I don't think the problem is the people that have obtained the guns legally. I think a lot of it is people that have obtained guns illegally. And it concerns me when someone wants to take my guns, which I have them strictly for either target practice or home protection. And I feel if somebody's going to come into my house with guns, they may or may not have obtained them legally, and I want to protect myself and protect my family. I do have a CCW permit. I do have a loaded firearm in my car, and it's locked up in my car. And I don't think I would ever use it on somebody unless my children were in danger. If it's simply myself in a situation, I would probably stand down from that. But if it's somebody else or my children, then that's when you have to look at using them to protect yourself. So I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, and I don't feel like I've done anything wrong to lose my guns. But, I think it goes back to mental illness, and you have to really vet people that do own guns and, make it maybe more difficult or, get people help that may need it if they're having bad thoughts. But
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
I mean,
go
I
ahead.
think there are people who, that is, generally there is some sort of thing going on when you do see the shootings happen that make the news. There are a lot of difficulties and problems that are assailing that person, and they're responding in a terrible way. But I think that's not the only problem, right? There's not just the school shootings. What amounts to, it seems just foolishness. You're very thoughtful in how you keep them locked up. You're very intentional about that. But a lot of people aren't. And that's how a lot of children die, just because they find the gun, it's loaded, and they will fire it and they kill themselves by accident. But the gun wasn't put away properly. And so, no, it's not. The old tired saying, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And yes, and these are dangerous weapons, right? We need to be thoughtful about how we store them, keep them, sell them, all the levels. But when it comes down to when you have it, you got to recognize this is a really powerful thing that can be used for good or for bad. Oftentimes for bad. That's in the news, right? Oftentimes for bad.
Yeah, thank you.
well, you have to respect the gun and its capability.
Sure.
That's 100%.
So really taking off from what you said, and also in terms of just the words that were being used from the 80s, we really have missed, I think, the conversation, and we've gone from we're looking at it as Second Amendment and gun control. And we really ought to take the gun control issue out of there, because if you look at the information from most groups that are working on this topic, they're not talking about taking guns away. They're talking about responsible gun ownership. And I think that if we really were to sit here and ask everyone, do you believe in responsible gun ownership? I believe most everyone would say, yeah, that makes sense. And so responsible gun ownership is exactly what you're modeling. The difficulty we have is what you also mentioned, we don't have a process across the nation for universal background checks. It's not done the same way in every single state. And so if you have, again, systems that aren't the same, you are going to sometimes have guns fall into the hands of people that maybe shouldn't have a gun at that time, whether it's their mental state, whether it's because they've made threats against another person. But there's reasons many times why we need that check and balance to make sure that the person purchasing a gun is able to handle that gun. And I can share a very personal story, and it's a hard one because it seems disrespectful of my father, but my father, I grew up with guns. My home has guns. My father was a hunter his entire life. When he turned 90, he had a heart attack, which caused vascular dementia. He suddenly started doing some odd things with his guns, and he was always very, very strong in the safety part. And so we sat down with him, had the conversation saying, we think perhaps it'd be safer if we just hold on to your guns. You can still go hunting. We'll make sure you get out to go hunting. He agreed. We took the guns home. A week later, he went to the local box store and walked out of the store with a gun. Because there wasn't any way to put in that record that this wasn't a safe individual at that time to own a gun. So those are the situations that sometimes we need to really be willing to look at to be sure that across the nation, we are assuring that guns are being purchased by responsible gun owners. And that we talk a lot about what is responsible gun ownership.
Yeah, what does it look like? Yeah.
Right.
And you know, and then so